Congressman Nunes, thank you so much for joining us on the Hill. We appreciate it.
Great to be with you.
So let's start with what's going on with these former senior intelligence agency officers, the directors of CIA, director of NSA. President Trump has threatened to possibly pull their clearances once they've left government service. What's your opinion of this move?
I can understand why the president's upset because their behavior is nothing short of being bizarre. However, I'm not sure it's a good use of time to have this fight, but watching the president, if somebody takes a shot at him, he wants to take a shot back. And as you're aware, you had many of these actors that he's talking about were involved with unverified dossiers that they pushed forward out into the public, that leaked out into the public, spilled into the public, that was bought and paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign. And these were the top intelligence officials, and they supposedly were all oblivious to it and didn't know about it, which is hard to believe. So you can understand why the president's upset. He thinks they've been dishonest with the American people. I think they look extremely dishonest, most of them. But at the end of the day, I would rather the president focus on, for example, if you're talking about just the Russiagate fiasco issues, I'd like to see him work on declassifying more of the FISA.
What, if any, evidence has your committee seen with regard to the FBI or the intelligence community running informants to gather dirt on Trump and Russia before the predicated investigation began in July of 2016?
So that's a very good question, and it's one of the outstanding questions that we have for the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein. We've had that question out to them for, well, pretty much 3 months now. They have not answered it yet.
Is it your belief that it is likely that there was activity going on in advance of the official start of that FBI investigation?
Well, I will just tell you that we wouldn't be asking those questions if we didn't think we had some suspicion of that. And look, the problem with this is running informants into political campaigns or political campaign actors on the counterintelligence side especially is a major problem.
Congressman,
I hope people understand why that is. It's because we give special powers to our counterintelligence officials, because really a lot of Americans' basic rights are taken away through that process, right? Because it's dealing with national security, it's usually a high level, so there should be a very high bar before you open up a counterintelligence investigation. So if you were running informants into campaigns, even before or after you open up an official investigation, most Americans, when you sit them down and talk to them, they know that that's something really bad that only happens in third world countries.
Given what we've seen with the release of the FISA warrants for Carter Page this most recent weekend, do you have confidence that the substantial redactions in that FISA request that went before the FISA Intelligence Court, do you have confidence that those redactions were made for real national security reasons and not reasons of political convenience or political covering up things for the FBI and the DOJ?
Well, I can tell you that what's in the redactions is equally bad. Some would probably say worse than what the American people can see today. So just to be clear, right? There's 400 pages. Roughly 75% of them are blacked out. Right? So people learned over the weekend that the dossier indeed was what led this FISA. So they used that dossier and pieces of that dossier to push the FISA out to Carter Page. But I would argue that what's left in there is really bad, if not worse, but also what's not in there is even worse than what people can see, what people can't see.
Do you feel vindicated with the memo you released months ago? There was a lot of political back and forth over the accuracy of that. Obviously, many of your Democrat colleagues were claiming that you were either cherry picking or deliberately misleading. And now we see a whole lot more. What's your response now the public has greater information to draw on?
I don't really get into that, right? Like, I'm not worried about vindication because I sleep well at night. Because I've been telling the truth the entire time. Everything that our committee has produced has proven to be factual and accurate. And I think at the end of all this, people are going to look back and see what a dark time in America's history this was. And it all started with weaponizing the FBI to go, and the Department of Justice to go and target a political campaign. And so we're slowly unraveling that, and the people who are covering this up will have to pay their price in history. But I would also add that that the media in this, and no offense to you, this is the first interview I've done with you, so we'll see, and it's live to tape, so I can't imagine that it's going to go too wrong here. But the media is totally culpable in this. They were in on this from the beginning. They had the dossier in the beginning. So imagine this. You've got probably a dozen or 2 dozen reporters in this city that know that that dossier was being shopped around by the Clinton campaign. They know that for a fact. And they're letting, going back to your first question, they're letting the top officials of the FBI, so the premier law enforcement agency in the world with a storied history, dozens of reporters have it here in Washington, but yet the director of the FBI doesn't know that the Clinton campaign paid for it. It's pretty sad either way.
It's certainly a commentary on the degree of vetting
Whichever way it
verification.
is, either they're lying, which is probably the case to some degree, or they're not lying, which makes them totally incompetent.
I wanted to ask you about this alleged Russian agent who was picked up off the street recently. We know that Marina Butina was interacting with different officials here. It's said that she was doing this on behalf of the Russian Federation and that she has contacts with senior oligarchs. She was picked up. Some are pointing to, and our colleague at the Hill, John Solomon, has information about this specifically, that there was an earlier effort going on with Russia where you had Anna Chapman, and as soon as she got close to some senior Hillary Clinton donors, the FBI picked her up right away, rolled up that group. Can you tell us why it seems there was disparate treatment here of a Russian who was an agent of influence acting on behalf of the Kremlin when it came to getting close to a Hillary donor some years ago versus what we've seen here with Maria Butina?
Well, first of all, I'd like to point out that the report that the Republicans on the Intelligence Committee put out actually had a section on this individual. So we actually did investigate this individual. She had suspicious ties. And look, at the end of the day, they're going to have to prosecute her, and she's going to go through the process. I think what people need to realize is that the reason that we have a counterintelligence capability in this country is to ensure that our major adversaries, okay, what are the high value adversaries like China, Russia, the ones that are in even Iran, North Korea, these are adversaries who are actively targeting Americans every single day. So the place they look first are political organizations, right? Is one place they go. Another place they look at is our defense infrastructure, financial sectors. These are all targets that are hit every single day, which is why the irony of all of this about the Russians stealing secrets from the Democratic Party is really not news, okay? The Russians are invading across the board into private companies to the highest levels of government. They are trying to attack this country on a daily basis.
When we come back, the rest of my talk with Congressman Nunes. He talks about a larger threat than the Russian one.
Stay tuned, more Rising is ahead.
Welcome back to Rising. Crystal, do you think that we should be concerned about election security coming up for the midterms?
I think it doesn't really matter what I think, but Dan Coates certainly believes that we've got a problem coming up for the midterms.
I see what you did there. We got the rest of my sit down with Congressman Devin Nunes coming up. He tells me what country he thinks is a bigger threat than Russia. Also what the U.S. needs to do to protect our midterm elections. But first, his suspicions about former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's private email server.
It's highly probable if you set up a server on the outside and you are a high-ranking government official, especially the Secretary of State, that many countries got into that server. Highly probable. So do I have specifics? No. But if I had to bet money, and I would have said this back when we were looking for the 33,000 emails, if you remember that. So even what they blame Papadopoulos on, the 33,000 email that he was supposedly trying to get the 33,000 emails, guess what? The United States Congress was trying to get the 33,000 missing emails. And at that time, As the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, I said it's highly probable that many countries have those emails. The Chinese threat is one that's a real threat, much bigger than anything I think we've faced.
Is China the biggest national security threat we face?
It definitely is, because they're becoming an economic power. And we're running an investigative study right now, and we're looking at 3 different areas with the Chinese. We're looking at military basing that they've put all across the country. That military basing, you have to understand, is soft power. So a lot of times it's just Chinese front companies that are going to be used ultimately as, or could be even today, as intelligence platforms. Secondly, we're looking at how they're stealing intellectual property on a daily basis. And the third issue that we're focusing on is how they're going into countries, including our own, and they're buying up major sectors of the economy, making investments. So in many countries, for example, they control the energy company. They might control the financial sector. Many countries around the globe. And so what that does is that allows them to influence other countries.
Have we taken real steps to do something about this? And how confident are you that the election process itself will be secure this fall?
Well, the one thing that we've been worrying about for many years on the Intelligence Committee is about the electronic voting systems. Those are really dangerous, in my opinion, and should not be used. In California, I believe, I don't know every county, but at least in the counties that I represent, they do not use the electronic system. And I think anybody that does that and that's communicating over the web, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge. So you have to make sure that you limit that as much as possible, and then we need a paper trail so that you can go back in case you have to do a manual recount.